Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Okay, some breaking news. Palantir has just invested into Hyundai Oil Bank. This is a company in Korea. It's a subsidiary of another company. We're going to read off the press release. We're going to analyze this, and we're going to try to understand at a deeper level why Palantir did this, what was the logic behind this, and ultimately what do they see as the trajectory for this investment. So let's start reading off a little bit on their press release. Hyundai Heavy Industry Holdings, HHH, unloaded some of its stakes in Hyundai Oil Bank to Palantir Technologies. The amount of the stock stole to the U.S. company was valued at about $20 million. $20 million is not the most amount of money in the world, so it seems like a very light investment, at least for a company like Palantir. $20 million would be a lot of money for someone like you and I. But nonetheless, that is a level that they sold off to Palantir. The decision was aimed at winning financial support from stable strategic investors as Hyundai Oil Bank is planning to pursue an initial public offering early next year. Hyundai Oil Bank plans to apply to the Korea Exchange for a preliminary examination within this year. So Hyundai Oil Bank, which is a subsidiary of HHH, and we're going to get into what the parent company is a company based in Korea, and ultimately they're planning to go for an IPO. So they wanted strategic investors on the cap table. The cap table of a company is basically the capitalized allocation, the allocation of capital that's allocated on a table, the cap table. So it sort of lets you know which investors are in certain companies. And when you have really good investors on your cap table, well, then you have a lot better opportunity to make strategic collaborations and partnerships because you have investors that are actually looking out for your best interests. Because if you do well, they do well. And if they're private shareholders on the company before it goes public, they want the IPO or the public to go as good as possible, because then they're going to make the best return. Hyundai Oil Bank and Palantir plan to build a long-term cooperative relationship with Palantir's investment in the HHH affiliate. And by building a big data platform, this is sort of the key here, through the collaboration with Palantir, Hyundai Oil Bank expects to accelerate its digital transformation in all of its business areas, including smart factories. That is one of the key things here. The business collaboration, or the data-driven business collaboration between Palantir and Hyundai Oil Bank is why Palantir is investing this money. So the $20 million that they're investing is not because they see an opportunity to make some money off oil, but rather see an opportunity to optimize and make more efficient and effective this company's particular relationship with how they get data, how they use data to get oil out into the world. Quote from a Hyundai Oil Bank official says, collaborating with Palantir will be a great opportunity to strengthen Hyundai Oil Bank's digital capabilities. We will do our best to establish and enhance our corporate value. Now, Palantir has decided to invest in Hyundai Oil Bank's oil refining business as well as in the value and growth potential of its highly evaluated new businesses such as petrochemicals and hydrogen, which was said by both of the companies. Pretty interesting stuff. Now, final thing before I get into some analysis, Hyundai Doosan Infracore, a subsidiary of the HHH construction machinery division, had signed a strategic partnership with Palantir, the first time for a domestic company to do so in 2019, with the goal of utilizing its big data collaboration platform to integrate, connect, and analyze business data from the past 40 years. So in 2019, that was pretty interesting. I didn't even remember that part when I initially read this. A different subsidiary of HHH had 40 years of data that they wanted to analyze, and Palantir was the software that they signed a deal with in 2019. Now, 2021, as Palantir has gone public and become a lot more bigger of a company, it's actually investing in other HHH affiliates like Hyundai Oil Bank, based upon data-driven collaborations and optimizing data for effective results. Now, what is HHH? This was really interesting. And, when I discovered this and I was doing some more research, it really made me remember how big the world is. Like, we're all stuck in our little bubbles of what our worlds are. And then you start to realize, wait a second, people in Korea need oil. Like, people in Korea need food. They need, industries. They need jobs. And you're like, oh yeah, the world is really big, right? So HHH is Hyundai Heavy Industries. And basically, from their website, they were established in 1972. They've grown into the world's leading heavy industries company by successfully diversifying from shipbuilding into offshore and engineering and engine and machinery. And over the past 49 years, they've basically grown and scaled the business. They have about 14,000 employees worldwide. This is one of those heavy industry companies that does a lot of the dirty work that companies do, right? They got to do mining, they got to get oil, they got to do industrialization, manufacturing. All of this stuff happens from some of the companies that we don't know about because they're not the sexy Twitters and Instagrams of the world, right? They're just like boring companies that do boring stuff. But the stuff that makes those companies even have the energy to do the stuff that they get to do, right? So this Hyundai Oil Bank is a subsidiary of that company. Now, a couple of reasons ultimately why I think Palantir made this investment. Number one, it is in line and consistent with its SPAC strategy. The SPAC strategy is when, and I did a video on it, link it in the description, is when Palantir is investing in different companies that are not public yet and allocating capital towards them in order to be on their cap table when they do go public. And those companies will ultimately use Palantir's software. So those companies become clients, and Palantir now has an equity stake in those companies. Those companies are not just random companies that you're investing in to see a return, which is what venture capital companies do, or venture capital firms. They just invest in a bunch of startups and hopefully one of them hits the moon. But rather, these are companies driven through data, right? Every decision they make, whether it's a healthcare company, a robotics company, a biotech company, or a car big data company, I've done a whole playlist on these so you can check them out, are rooted in using data to optimize for their business decisions, their business results, and ultimately their business outcomes, right? So data is integral. It is within the fabric of the startup in and of itself, and Palantir likes that type of company. Palantir's software is integrated with that type of company, so the investment makes sense. To me, this is in line with that strategy, because if you're investing $20 million into an oil bank company that gets oil and petrochemicals and hydrogen in Korea, right? It shows to me that this is kind of what gets me excited about the company. It shows to me that their software of data analysis, their service that they provide, that has high margins because it's a SaaS offering, and SaaS offerings tend to have high margins, is required everywhere. And if they can own certain parts of companies that are ultimately using their software, as the software enhances and as those companies enhance because of using their software, then that means that the potential for the stake in the company, the ownership stake, has a chance to increase. And the more and more of these tiny little ownership increases they have across the entire world, it seems to prop up the value of Palantir as those companies start to do well. I mean, that's a really strategic way of how they're going to do their earnings calls in the future, because they're going to be showing the results of these other companies and the impact it has economically on their company and their bottom line as well. So that's really interesting. The second reason I think they did this is the international expansion, right? Like, so Palantir has been known to really work with Europe and North America when it comes to integrating their software, and primarily with governments. That's kind of why the stock is taking a hit right now, because Wall Street doesn't think that they really have commercial sectors to be able to market to. So this is obviously a commercial sector. It's the oil business, and their ability to go outside of the United States, right, into just a brand new country, or not a brand new country. South Korea is not a brand new, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, go into a industry in which they have not really been in a particular location, because they've done oil and gas, but not necessarily just some random company that's a subsidiary in South Korea, and they're able to provide their services and own a piece of that. That to me seems like an international expansion that actually makes sense. And that seems to say that other companies and little subsidiaries of companies and subsidiaries of subsidiaries of companies are eventually going to realize, hey, if they're working with all these other companies, maybe we should use them. Maybe we have some data that we can optimize that can help us save money and optimize for our results. So I ultimately think it's in line with the SPAC strategy, and I think it's in line with the strategy of just internationally expanding and being in every single commercial sector of everywhere. I say this in a lot of videos. All of us use Google to search for information. Would all businesses in the world use Palantir to understand the information, i.e. the data that they have? And if they can, then that could be a really interesting thing. So these are my thoughts on this. Again, it was breaking news. I think it happened last week, really on Friday. Just randomly saw it. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool stuff. I don't think it was officially PR'd by Palantir. It was PR'd by this company, and I started to look into it and started to understand it more. But again, it's interesting. You see stuff like this, random stuff that happens, and you're like, they're really trying to go after it. They're really trying to integrate everywhere and be everywhere when it comes to their software ultimately being utilized. So let me know your guys' thoughts and comments. I do read all the comments. I love replying to them. What do you think about them integrating with a oil company in South Korea? The last thing I did want to say before I send it off is Palantir is trying to get big into the energy business, right? So right now, Hyundai Oil Bank is an oil bank, but they're trying to get into hydrocarbons as well. Is there a world in which Hyundai Oil Bank turns into Hyundai Renewables, and that transition from oil bank to renewables, because that transition from a macro perspective is inevitable for most of these types of legacy companies? And Palantir is the basis, again, the fabric that gets them from point A to point B, that gets them to go from storing and managing oil to eventually storing and managing energy from nuclear fission plants. Like, again, if you're working with them now and you own a piece of them now, when they start to transition 20, 30 years from now and you're still there, how much value does that create? How much does that increase Palantir's value proposition to these types of companies? So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.